they are. They're doing, okay, well, we're sending some Amivit over or something, you know.
Hold button in your right hand. This is where your thumb is. You press that at any time, okay? Just until we get you into the scanner.
Lying here, getting ready to have my head scanned for a potentially life-altering diagnosis of brain disease, is not where I thought I'd be 10 years ago. But in a weird way, I'm glad I'm here. So here we go. I'm Tim Fleiszer, Executive Director of the Concussion Legacy Foundation Canada, and I've spent the last decade trying to inform the public that the prevention of concussions and CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, are really important to the health of our brains. I've lobbied international sporting bodies in Amsterdam, raised awareness to, well, anyone who would listen, and even taken my cause to Parliament. So why am I so obsessed with head injuries? I played 10 years in the Canadian Football League.
Tim Fleiszer bleeding on the field.
I would estimate that I've endured at least 100 concussive episodes to my head during my career. I mean, back then it just wasn't a big deal, right? It was what you would call a ding. It's, you know, you get hit and feel a little bit weird or see stars or feel a little bit off balance or get a dull headache or those. But back then it just wasn't a big deal. It's something that you played through. My risk factor for chronic traumatic encephalopathy and all the nasty things associated with it is extremely high.
Baker's kick is back. Grant takes it at the 22, and he is hammered at the 32-yard line. Oh, boy.
Take it from me, I know what's at stake. I've lost friends to suicide and addiction. What did they have in common? A history of brain injuries. So my goal is now to stop it from impacting others, especially kids. The bottom line is, kids should not be taking headshots. And kids that do sustain a brain injury need their injury to be taken seriously and treated properly. And I'm happy to say our work has helped support an Ontario law that is doing just that.
Rowan Stringer was rushed by ambulance to an Ottawa hospital on May 8, 2013, after receiving a brutal head injury during a rugby game. She would pass away 4 days later from second impact syndrome, an uncontrolled swelling of the brain that witnesses said Stringer incurred after being thrown to the ground by an opponent. She was unconscious, with her eyes dilated, both symptoms of a severe brain injury.
Sadly, Rowan's Law, which is now 6 years old, came about due to the tragedy that afflicted Gord and Kathleen Stringer when their daughter Rowan died as a result of multiple head injuries sustained on the rugby field in 2013.
They believe there were 3 concussions over a period of 6 days. The final concussion being the one that was ended up being fatal. Second impact syndrome is a situation that happens with catastrophic swelling of the brain when there are multiple undiagnosed and untreated concussions. It is a completely preventable condition.
So one of the things that we've looked at is why athletes fail to report concussions. And particularly at the youth level, one of the ones that you see is not wanting to let their teammates or their coach or their parents down.
One problem with head injuries is they are invisible. So if your child goes to play pee-wee soccer and they break their wrist, they put a cast on it and nobody questions it. And that's the unfortunate thing with head injuries, is that it's hidden. But one thing we learned is that her friends actually knew that she had got hurt. She had Googled concussion, so she knew that she maybe had one. The unfortunate thing in 2013 was when she did that Google search, it didn't give her all the information she needed to know.
The good news is that today, Rowan's Law and concussions are being explained to school kids across Ontario. The bad news? The rest of the provinces and Ottawa are dragging their feet.
And so that's the challenge now, is to try to engage the other provinces. We have the Rowan's Law Handbook. We've done like the groundwork, and the other provinces could work off that quite easily.
The template is there, and to my mind, I've looked internationally, and Ontario right now has, in my opinion, the gold standard to be emulated. Yeah, this is a good thing. We should all be doing this.
The Stringers aren't alone in pushing governments to follow Ontario's lead with Rowan's Law. Long-time Canadian Football League star running back, and now Ontario's Minister of Sport, is also on the case.
My name is Neil Lumsden, and I grew up in this area around Northern Secondary School, played 3 years of football here before I went off to the University of Ottawa. 3 of the greatest years of my life.
But back then, concussions, CTE, and brain injuries were far from top of mind.
As a matter of fact, in those days, you were taught to lead with the front part of your helmet, your forehead, on contact. So that was your center point on how you made contact with people. But it was never a thought that it was translating into something down the road that was much more serious.
He made it. What a hit that was. In a word, wow. That might be the hit of the year.
A good friend and a teammate many years ago, they thought that he ended up committing suicide because they thought he was suffering from CTE. I see way more of it than I wish I have, sadly. So for me, thanks to Rowan's Law and Rowan Stringer's family, based on what happened to her, that people need to be more aware of what an ongoing impact to the head and neck can mean long term. The impact that Rowan's Law has made in her family and the previous minister, Lisa MacLeod, changed the landscape completely.
I do want to talk to you about the seriousness of head injury and also the possibility of it being fatal. You can't put your kid back on the ice or on the pitch or on the field or on the court if they have a head injury.
But like the Stringers, Neil Lumsden also sees other provinces and the federal government delaying when it comes to head injuries.
It's been very frustrating when I sit down at those meetings. It does seem like a no-brainer.
So, for now, guided by Rowan's Law, the Ontario government simply wants to ensure every parent recognizes the concussion signs.
And you can tell, because I've had to do it. And you look your son or your daughter in their eye after you think something's wrong, you know something's wrong. And that's when you step in and say, okay, you're not playing tomorrow, you're not playing next week, we're going to the doctor and we're going to get you looked at.
In Ontario, we know that so many kids have less injury and are more educated. We don't want to see that ever happen to another family. The loss of a child is so devastating that it's hard to put it into words, and I don't want other people to understand it because I would never want you to go through it. And so that was hard because, of course, her friends have jobs and they're getting married and they're having children. But for me, I feel like Rowan's fulfilled her dream of helping children because the law has saved children's lives and also prevented injury. So in that way, Rowan's been hugely successful in what her dream has been, and that was making the lives of children better.
She's not here, but it was our job to deliver on the potential that she had.
The work we are doing with Rowan's Law is changing concussion behavior, as well as the understanding of what happens with severe blows to the head. But the new science is also highlighting that even smaller hits to the head, repeated over and over again, also leads to massive problems. It's called CTE. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a brain disease that's associated with repetitive impacts over time. So in other words, your risk factor for chronic traumatic encephalopathy is not how many concussions you've had, but how many repetitive head impacts you've had. And unfortunately, the disease continues to spread even after the impacts stop. So in other words, after athletes retire. So what you often see is people presenting with symptoms sometimes, decades after their careers are over.
That's crazy. He spent like 5 minutes with me. Yeah. And I got in a car and I said to my dad, I was like, I want to go play.
My name is Bruce Murray, and I'm a former U.S. World Cup Olympic soccer player, and I'm in the Hall of Fame 2011. Back in the day, we would do corner kick practice, and they'd whip balls in at 80 miles an hour, and you'd get 30, 40 reps, and you stumble back to the line and head another one, and you knew it wasn't right. I had a number of serious concussions when I was playing. I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I got a guy ran his knee right through my skull, and I swallowed my tongue. I had a seizure on the field. Right now, it's kind of tough. I get bad headaches. Light headaches, decision-making, impulse control, a little drinking too much.
So that's what happens with CTE, where it's these non-concussive impacts that total up over time. What's historically happened is that a lot of these issues, whether it be impulse control, behavioral problems, whether it be addiction issues, whether it be violence, these are all things that people thought were just a result of mental health issues.
This is going to be the death of me. I have a really bad short-term memory, and I have to work really hard to remember anything. And my phone is like number one, because I've lost my phone and my credit cards, but the problem is I lose the phone. And I've replaced my license 5 times this year, credit cards 10 times. I mean, it's a constant battle, but it's exhausting. It's really
So where the discussion of the disease started was with boxers. Right? I don't think it's news to anybody that boxers would end up with long-term issues. Right? It was punch drunk syndrome, or dementia pugilistica was the clinical term that they were using. And what it all boils down to is a protein called tau, a usually healthy protein in our brains that turns bad. And the way to think about tau is it's almost like a mortar within the microtubule. So it holds together the superhighways that the electric impulses travel up and down from the brain to the rest of the body. And what happens is the tau ends up getting misplaced in the brain. So it ends up in places where it's not supposed to be, and that's where it ends up binding onto healthy cells and killing them. And that is why the University of Ottawa and Riverdale School in the Bronx are working to reduce the number of head impacts athletes receive over the course of their career.
My name is John Peasy. I am the Director of Athletics at Riverdale Country School, and we're here in the Bronx. Unfortunately, there's no good data on head injuries in soccer. We're working with the University of Ottawa to discover where headers happen on the field.
This is revolutionary science. This high school soccer pitch is quite literally being mapped by videotape to show where exactly every head hit transpires.
We want to share our film so that they can just do basic research to understand this area of the field is where the most headers come from. These are how many headers happen during a game per player. If you're a defender, this is how many headers happen. If you're an attack player, this is how many headers happen. So step one is for University of Ottawa researchers to take the film and count the exact number of headers.
From here, the tape of each game is quickly sent to this world-leading lab at the University of Ottawa, where doctors Blaine Hajisaki and Clara Carton are conducting mind-rattling science.
What we specialize in is trying to understand the event that creates trauma to the brain. One of the really exciting things at Riverdale that John Peasy is really looking at is changing the game. And that is unique in that he's looking at ways to modify the game so that he can decrease trauma load to his athlete. So they're making modifications to the game so that they can decrease that trauma load that would then maintain less risk to mental health. That's pretty exciting. But the data really creates facts. So they're looking at, as you say, midfield impacts, headers at midfield or headers into the goal. And what we can do for them is when we see it, we can count the frequency of that and the magnitude of those impacts.
We capture the simulated headers at 2,000 frames per second so that we can look at detail in a slow motion camera. We look at the velocity details because you're going to get different velocities if it's a throw-in versus a corner kick or a goalie kick to midfield.
The main thing is that when the ball hits the head, it accelerates the skull, and the skull accelerates the brain, which then distorts the brain tissue, and therein lies a problem that you can have changes in the molecular structure of the brain tissue, the proteins of the neurons, that you can damage the neurons.
So we place the ball here in order to accelerate the ball into the head form to simulate the header. Now this is one of our adult head forms, but we also have head forms for women and children. And we have sensors inside the head form so we can measure how the head moves so that we could then look at the brain tissue response. And what we have inside are 9 accelerometers to measure the head motion, essentially linear and rotational head motion. So then we can look at what's subsequently happening in the brain tissue.
Mapping the number of hits on a field, or to my head, is the science I wish I had decades ago. And that's why I'm here at CAMH in Toronto, the most cutting-edge lab in the world on brain imaging. I volunteered to be the first patient ever to have my brain scanned with this man's new radioactive tracer.
We're not disrupting anything in the brain.
Dr. Neil Vazdev is the world's foremost brain expert on radiochemistry for CTE and other neurodegenerative diseases. Dr. Vazdev's goal here is to detect if CTE is starting to show up in my still very much alive brain.
All right, well, welcome to our CAMH Brain Health Imaging Center. The center's been around for about 35 years. We're one of the largest facilities in the world dedicated solely to brain health. We have a total of 2 labs and 17 hot cells where we manufacture new radioactive pharmaceuticals for imaging the living human brain. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for coming today. This is awesome. We appreciate you being patient 0001. This is a first-in-human brain imaging study. This is a historic moment for us at CAMH, and we appreciate you helping us try to solve the concussion crisis. As you know, CTE can only be detected post-mortem, but we want to be the first lab in the world to detect CTE in life. What you're seeing here is a state-of-the-art positron emission tomography, or PET scanner, which is combined with CT, or CAT scanning, which gives you an X-ray. So we can get an X-ray of the brain, which gives you the structure, and a PET scan of the brain, which tells us about the function at the exact same time. Tim's going to be going into the scanner. We're going to be injecting him with a brand new radioactive tracer that was developed here at CAMH. And we're so excited about this because this is the first in human scan with this tracer. This ring is full of detectors. So when the 2 detectors on this side or this side get a hit, it starts to draw coincidence lines, and that's how we localize the radioactive source. And that's what gives PET its exceptional resolution. Well, they put it on L-DOPA, and my boss, he injected his boss.
Pretty honored to be able to be the first guy to go into the scanner and to have my brain looked at. They need healthy controls for this study. Trying to figure out why, after years and years and years of football and hockey and soccer and repetitive head impacts, that I'm asymptomatic when so many of my colleagues are not and have suffered. If I'm going to ask people to sign up for research and to be part of this stuff, I better be the first guy in. So here we go.
Okay, so you can always adjust that.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I'm going to quickly check if it
But the good news is that if we're able to diagnose this during life, the chances of them coming out with treatment strategies before this becomes an issue for me is very, very good.
So far, the only way to diagnose the accumulation of this protein called tau was through autopsy. But now, with this new potential biomarker, we might be able to identify in vivo. In vivo means when the patient is still alive, of course, and that's where we want to have an impact. And that's ultimately our aim, to identify potential therapies that could interfere with this accumulation of tau.
Now, I'm going to walk you through and show you what's happening in real time. Tim is in the PET CT right now. The radioactivity was injected about an hour and a half ago. And we're watching the radio tracer distribute in the brain over the course of 2 hours. What's happening now is we're also taking blood samples from him so we can analyze how the radio tracer is being metabolized in real time. Right now, they're analyzing the blood from Tim that's being drawn. And this is actually Tim's brain. He was scanned here last night, and this is a cross-section going through his actual brain. And we're going to use this for structural information as we overlay it with the PET scan. So we can see the different brain regions, and we'll be able to see what regions are lit up with the PET scan.
We've really gone after cancer, and we're seeing big strides in cancer, and look at the money that's being put behind that to find that. Now it's mental health time.
CAMH and Dr. Neil Vazdev's lab, which is just absolutely amazing. For first time, we're able to look at the brain of live people and determine what is going on with this state of concussed brain.
I look at this equipment and I'm stunned with some of the stuff that's going on here. They just shock me what they've learned and what they're doing. I know one thing, I can raise money, and that's what we're after. And we're trying to get the best donors, and all I want is the donors to come down and go through that building. And if you walk out of there and don't donate $1, you haven't got no soul on my side. You just have to get in there and see what's going on, and you're going to come out and write a check.
As for me, well, after 3 hours of brain tests, I am done. Literally and figuratively. And as I look at the pictures of my brain, to my layman's eye, it seems, well, okay. But only time will tell. I can only hope I am lucky enough to live a long, healthy brain life, because too many, like Rowan Stringer, have not. And that is why we must advance Rowan's Law, to honor her and the Stringer family's legacy.